Jasmine Washington, brilliant black CEO of TechVision Enterprises, stands humiliated at Newark Airport's first-class check-in counter. Agent denies her boarding despite platinum status and first-class ticket. Minutes later, white executive Harold Bennett walks up, receives red carpet treatment. Jasmine's face burns with familiar indignity as chaos is about to unfold. Before we dive into this shocking story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever witnessed or experienced discrimination in places where money and status should have created equality. Let's expose these everyday injustices together. Jasmine Washington was no stranger to adversity. Growing up on Chicago's South Side, she'd learned early that the world wouldn't hand her anything. Her parents, her father Jordan a high school math teacher and mother Denise a nurse, had instilled in her an unwavering work ethic and the belief that excellence wasn't optional, but necessary for survival. Excellence is the only option when mediocrity isn't forgiven, became her personal mantra, one she repeated daily while studying late into the night under the flickering light of her bedroom desk lamp. While her classmates at the underfunded West Side High School shared textbooks and worked with outdated computers, Jasmine would stay 3 hours after the final bell, using the single functioning computer in the library to teach herself coding. Her determination didn't go unnoticed. Mrs. Patterson, her AP computer science teacher, became her advocate, driving her to MIT campus visits and helping her secure scholarship applications. When the acceptance letter arrived with a full scholarship, Jasmine's parents cried tears of joy and pride. But Jasmine knew this was just the beginning. At MIT, the battle continued. In lecture halls filled with predominantly white and Asian male students, Jasmine often found herself the only black woman present. Professors would mistake her for janitorial staff. Study groups would form without inviting her, assuming she couldn't keep up. But Jasmine silenced doubters with her performance, graduating top of her class with dual degrees in computer science and business management. The corporate world proved no different. At her first tech job with GlobalSoft, Jasmine experienced the familiar sting of bias. Clients would address questions to her white male subordinates, assuming she was an assistant. Her suggestions in meetings would be ignored until repeated by male colleagues. The pattern was frustratingly predictable. After 5 years of hitting glass ceilings, Jasmine made the decision to build her own ladder. With $50,000 in savings and a revolutionary algorithm she developed for predictive market analysis, she founded TechVision Enterprises in a tiny rented office space in Chicago's emerging tech district. The early days tested her resolve. Venture capitalists would listen to her pitch with furrowed brows, then decline, suggesting her interesting little project might benefit from more experienced leadership. Translation: a white male face would make them more comfortable investing. Jasmine refused to sacrifice control, instead bootstrapping the company and taking on consulting work to keep the lights on. The breakthrough came when her algorithm accurately predicted a major market shift that competitors missed. Suddenly, the same VCs who had dismissed her were calling with offers. Jasmine accepted limited investment but maintained majority control, a decision that raised eyebrows but earned grudging respect in the industry. Within 5 years, TechVision grew from a one-woman operation to a 500-employee company valued at $350 million. Their headquarters now occupied the top 3 floors of a gleaming downtown Chicago building, with satellite offices in New York, Atlanta, and soon, if today's meeting went well, San Francisco. This morning's flight to San Francisco wasn't just another business trip. Jasmine was heading to a potentially game-changing meeting with Innovate Tech, a Silicon Valley giant interested in a merger that would value TechVision at over $1 billion. This deal would cement her place in tech history and open doors for hundreds of other black women entrepreneurs. Jasmine had prepared meticulously. Her presentation was flawless, her negotiation strategy carefully crafted. Her assistant, Nathan Jenkins, had arranged everything perfectly: first-class tickets, luxury hotel, private car service, ensuring she would arrive rested and ready. That morning, she had selected her armor carefully. A tailored navy suit from a black designer, subtle gold jewelry, and her signature natural hair styled in an elegant updo. Her appearance was a calculated balance, professional enough for conservative boardrooms but authentic enough to honor her identity. Every detail mattered when you were constantly being judged by different standards. During the car ride to Newark Airport, Jasmine had reviewed her presentation notes one final time while mentally rehearsing responses to potential objections. The merger would mean integrating TechVision's market prediction software with Innovate Tech's consumer products, creating an AI ecosystem that could revolutionize how companies anticipated customer needs. As the driver pulled up to the terminal, Jasmine felt the familiar pre-meeting adrenaline. She'd arrived 2 hours early, planning to use the first-class lounge to make final preparations. Her platinum status with the airline, earned through countless business trips, usually ensured smooth travels. Walking through the terminal, Jasmine noticed the familiar glances, the slight double takes, the quick assessments trying to determine why this black woman was dressed in expensive business attire, rolling premium luggage. She'd grown accustomed to these microaggressions, filing them away in the mental cabinet where she stored all such experiences, a cabinet that had grown discouragingly full over the years. What she couldn't have anticipated was that today, at Newark International Airport, that cabinet would overflow, setting in motion events that would transform not just her journey to San Francisco, but the corporate landscape itself. The first-class check-in area at Newark International Airport was designed to exude exclusivity. Plush carpeting, minimal lines, and attentive staff created an atmosphere of privilege and comfort. A stark contrast to the chaotic main terminal just yards away. This separation was intentional, a physical manifestation of status designed to make premium passengers feel their money purchased not just a wider seat, but dignity itself. Jasmine approached the counter with the practiced confidence of someone who belonged in first-class spaces, despite the subtle resistance she often encountered in such environments. She placed her platinum membership card and identification on the counter, alongside her first-class ticket to San Francisco. "Good morning," she said to the agent, a white woman whose name tag identified her as Brenda Taylor. "Flight 1857 to San Francisco, departing at 10:15. Brenda's smile faltered slightly as she looked up, a barely perceptible shift that Jasmine had learned to recognize over years of similar interactions. The agent's eyes darted from Jasmine to her documents, then back again, her expression tightening. "I'll need to see some additional identification," Brenda said, her tone noticeably cooler than the cheerful greeting she'd offered the previous passenger, an older white man. Jasmine nodded, accustomed to such requests. She produced her passport and company ID, placing them alongside her driver's license already on the counter. Brenda examined each document with exaggerated scrutiny, holding Jasmine's passport up to the light and comparing the photo to her face multiple times. "Is there a problem?" Jasmine asked, maintaining her professional tone despite the familiar burn of indignation rising in her chest. "These first-class tickets are quite expensive," Brenda replied, emphasizing the word expensive as though it were incompatible with Jasmine's presence. "Are you sure you're at the right counter?" The implication hung in the air between them. Several nearby passengers glanced over, some with uncomfortable expressions, others with barely concealed curiosity. "I'm certain," Jasmine replied evenly. "I've been a platinum member for 5 years and fly first class regularly for business." Brenda's lips pursed. "Well, there seems to be an issue with your reservation. The system is flagging it for verification." Jasmine knew this was unlikely. Nathan had confirmed everything yesterday. "Could you please explain what specific issue the system is flagging?" "My assistant confirmed all details just yesterday." "It's a security protocol," Brenda replied vaguely. "Sometimes the system requires additional verification for certain passengers." The pause before passengers spoke volumes. Jasmine felt her heart rate increasing but maintained her composed exterior. She'd navigated these waters before, the delicate balance between standing her ground and not fulfilling stereotypes about angry black women that would only make the situation worse. "I understand security concerns," Jasmine said carefully. "However, I've never encountered this issue before despite flying this route monthly." Perhaps a supervisor could help resolve whatever flag the system is raising. Brenda's expression hardened. All supervisors are currently busy. You'll need to wait or try the main check-in area. There's nothing more I can do at this counter right now. Before Jasmine could respond, movement near the entrance caught her attention. A white man in his 50s, dressed in an expensive but slightly rumpled suit, approached the first-class counter. Jasmine recognized him immediately, Harold Bennett, CEO of Silverstream Tech, one of TechVision's main competitors. Brenda's demeanor transformed instantly. Her tight expression bloomed into a warm smile as she literally stepped away from Jasmine to greet him. "Mr. Bennett. So wonderful to see you again," she gushed. "Flying to San Francisco today?" Bennett nodded, handing over his documents with the casual confidence of someone who never expected scrutiny. "Yes, heading to some tedious meetings," he replied with an easy laugh. "The usual Silicon Valley song and dance." "We'll make sure your journey is relaxing," Brenda assured him, processing his documents without a second glance. No additional verification, no system flags, no questioning whether he belonged in first class. "We always take care of our VIPs, Mr. Bennett," she added, handing him his boarding pass with both hands, as if presenting a gift. "Would you like an escort to the lounge?" Jasmine stood frozen, the contrast so stark it momentarily robbed her of words. The same agent who had questioned her documents, her status, her very presence in the first-class line was now offering white-glove service to Bennett without hesitation. The unfairness of it crystallized something in Jasmine. She'd spent years navigating these indignities with strategic silence, calculating when speaking up was worth the potential cost. But something about this moment, perhaps the proximity to her potentially history-making meeting, perhaps the accumulated weight of thousands of similar experiences, made silence suddenly unbearable. With deliberate movements, Jasmine reached into her purse and activated her phone's recording function, placing it casually on the counter with the camera facing the interaction. Then she took a deep breath and prepared to challenge what was happening, fully aware that her actions in the next few minutes might have consequences far beyond this check-in counter. "Excuse me," Jasmine said, her voice clear and measured as she stepped back toward the counter. Both Brenda and Harold Bennett turned to look at her, Brenda's expression immediately souring while Bennett's showed mild curiosity. "I believe I was still being helped," Jasmine continued. "And I'd like to speak with a supervisor immediately regarding the inconsistent application of your security protocols." Brenda's face flushed slightly. "As I mentioned, all supervisors are currently unavailable. If you'd like to wait." "I find it difficult to believe that an international airport has no supervisory staff available," Jasmine interrupted, her tone professional but firm. "Especially when I've just witnessed a clear disparity in how passengers are treated at this counter." Bennett shifted uncomfortably, glancing between Jasmine and Brenda as he seemed to register what was happening. "I'll call for a supervisor," Brenda said tightly, reaching for a phone beneath the counter. After a brief, hushed conversation, she looked up with poorly concealed satisfaction. "Supervisor Rodriguez will be here shortly. In the meantime, perhaps you could step aside so I can assist other passengers." "I'll wait right here, thank you," Jasmine replied, standing her ground. She noticed more travelers watching now, the tension at the counter becoming a small spectacle in the otherwise orderly first-class area. Within minutes, a man in his mid-40s with a name tag identifying him as Keith Rodriguez approached. His expression was already set in lines of irritation before he even reached the counter. "What seems to be the problem here?" he asked, directing the question at Brenda rather than Jasmine. "This passenger is insisting on immediate service despite a security flag in our system," Brenda explained. "I've tried to explain our protocols, but she's being rather difficult." The characterization stung, but Jasmine had expected it. The difficult label was a familiar weapon used to discredit legitimate concerns from black women. "I'm not being difficult, Mr. Rodriguez," Jasmine said calmly. "I'm simply requesting equal treatment. I've presented multiple forms of identification, confirmed my platinum status, and verified my first-class ticket. Yet Ms. Taylor has refused to process my boarding pass while immediately serving Mr. Bennett here without any additional verification. She gestured toward her document still spread across the counter, then to her phone which was still recording. Ms. Taylor suggested there was some sort of security flag on my account, but failed to specify what that might be. Interestingly, this flag appeared only after she saw my face. Rodriguez's expression hardened. "Ma'am, are you recording this interaction?" "That's against airport policy." "Actually, New Jersey is a one-party consent state for recordings," Jasmine replied. "And given the nature of this interaction, I believe documentation is prudent." From the corner of her eye, Jasmine noticed a uniformed security officer approaching, hand resting casually near his taser. The situation was escalating exactly as she had feared. "Sir," she addressed Rodriguez directly, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart, "I'm Jasmine Washington, CEO of TechVision Enterprises. I fly first class on this airline monthly. Today I'm traveling to San Francisco for a critical business meeting, and I'm being denied service while watching another CEO receive preferential treatment. I would like to understand why." Rodriguez glanced at Bennett, who was still standing awkwardly to the side, then back to Jasmine. "Ms. Washington, I understand your frustration, but there's no discrimination happening here. Sometimes our system flags certain tickets for additional verification. Ms. Taylor was simply following protocols." "What specific protocol requires multiple forms of ID from me but none from Mr. Bennett?" Jasmine pressed. "And what specific flag appeared on my account?" The security officer, whose name tag read Officer Wilson, moved closer. "Is everything all right here?" he asked, addressing his question to Rodriguez rather than Jasmine. "This passenger is becoming aggressive," Rodriguez replied, the characterization making Jasmine's blood boil despite her outwardly calm demeanor. "I haven't raised my voice or made any aggressive movements," Jasmine stated clearly, aware that the situation was becoming increasingly dangerous. Black passengers confronted by airport security often faced excessive force, and the statistics flashed through her mind like warning signals. By now, a small crowd had gathered. Among them, a young woman with short purple hair had her phone out, clearly recording the escalating scene. Jasmine felt a surge of gratitude for this unknown ally. "I'm simply asking why I was required to present multiple forms of identification and still denied service, while another passenger received immediate assistance with minimal verification," Jasmine continued, projecting her voice slightly to ensure the growing audience could hear clearly. "If there's no discrimination happening, there should be a clear explanation for this disparity." Officer Wilson shifted his weight, his hand still hovering near his weapon. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to lower your voice and step away from the counter." "My voice is perfectly modulated, Officer Wilson," Jasmine replied. "And I'm not leaving this counter until I receive equal treatment or a clear explanation for why that's not possible." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Rodriguez and Officer Wilson exchanged glances, clearly calculating their next move. Brenda stared stonily ahead, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. And then, unexpectedly, Harold Bennett cleared his throat. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying authority developed over decades in corporate boardrooms. "I believe Ms. Washington raises a valid point. I was processed immediately without additional verification, while she's been questioned extensively despite presenting multiple forms of identification." All eyes turned to Bennett, surprise evident on every face. The security dynamic shifted perceptibly as the white male CEO, the very beneficiary of the preferential treatment, acknowledged the disparity. Jasmine felt a momentary surge of vindication, but knew this confrontation was far from over. The next few minutes would determine whether justice would prevail or whether she'd become just another black traveler removed from an airport for non-compliance. She squared her shoulders and prepared for whatever came next, knowing that backing down now wasn't an option, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever faced similar treatment and lacked the platform to challenge it. As tension crackled through the first-class check-in area, an unexpected voice cut through the standoff. "Excuse me, I'm an attorney, and I've been watching this entire interaction. All heads turned toward a tall black woman in her 40s, dressed in a crisp pantsuit with a leather briefcase at her side. She stepped forward confidently, positioning herself next to Jasmine. "Rachel Brown, civil rights attorney," she introduced herself. "And what I'm witnessing appears to be a textbook case of disparate treatment based on race." Officer Wilson's hand finally moved away from his taser, his expression shifting from confrontational to cautious. Supervisor Rodriguez straightened his posture, suddenly aware that the situation had legal implications. "Ms. Brown, this is an airport security matter," Rodriguez began, but Rachel cut him off smoothly. "This is a civil rights matter unfolding in a public space," she corrected. "And I'm willing to serve as a witness should Ms. Washington decide to pursue legal action." The dynamic shifted palpably. Rachel's professional presence and legal terminology transformed Jasmine from a difficult passenger to a potential plaintiff with expert backing. "I've experienced similar treatment at this very counter," added another voice. A middle-aged black man in a doctor's coat stepped forward. "Dr. William Turner, Chief of Neurosurgery at Manhattan General. 3 months ago, I was asked to verify my first-class ticket with additional ID while white passengers received no such scrutiny." The crowd of onlookers had grown, with at least a dozen people now watching openly. Several had phones out, recording the confrontation. Jasmine noticed a few people typing rapidly, likely sharing the unfolding scene on social media. Then Harold Bennett stepped fully into the circle, positioning himself where everyone could see him. The move surprised Jasmine, she'd expected him to distance himself from the controversy. "As I mentioned," Bennett said, louder now, clearly addressing the entire gathered crowd, "I received immediate service while Ms. Washington was subjected to questioning. Same airline status, same class of ticket, different treatment. The disparity is unmistakable." Jasmine studied Bennett with curiosity. They had met briefly at industry events, but their interactions had been minimal and somewhat cold. TechVision and Silverstream were competitors, after all, often vying for the same clients and investment dollars. During their last encounter at the National Tech Summit, Bennett had barely acknowledged her presence despite her company winning Innovation of the Year. Something had changed in him. Bennett's expression showed genuine discomfort, not just with the current situation but perhaps with a realization about his own privilege. Jasmine wondered what had triggered this apparent awakening. "My daughter Jessica," Bennett said suddenly, as if reading Jasmine's thoughts, "is a sociology professor at Columbia. Last month at dinner, she challenged me about benefiting from systems I didn't create but nonetheless profit from. I dismissed her arguments then." He paused, looking directly at Jasmine. "I owe her an apology. And perhaps you as well, Ms. Washington." The unexpected admission created a moment of stunned silence. Even Officer Wilson seemed unsure how to proceed now that the narrative had shifted so dramatically. More passengers were gathering, some clearly recognizing both CEOs. Jasmine noticed several people whispering, pointing subtly at her and Bennett. The story was growing beyond a single incident of discrimination to something potentially viral. "I've just checked Twitter," said the young woman with purple hair who had been recording. "Videos of this are already getting shared with hashtag #FirstClassEquality and hashtag #FlyingWhileBlack. Local news has picked it up too." Supervisor Rodriguez seemed to grasp the expanding public relations disaster. He stepped forward, hands raised placatingly. "Ms. Washington, perhaps we could resolve this matter privately in our customer service office?" "No," Jasmine said firmly. "This happens in private every day. The conversation needs to happen publicly, with accountability." Several people in the crowd nodded in agreement. The momentum had shifted definitively. Have you ever witnessed discrimination like this but felt powerless to speak up? Comment number 1 if you believe Jasmine was right to stand her ground, or number 2 if you think she should have taken the private resolution option. Like and subscribe if you believe more people need to challenge these everyday injustices. How do you think the airline will respond to this growing PR nightmare? Let's find out in the next part of this incredible true story. Within 30 minutes of the confrontation beginning, Newark Airport's first-class check-in area had transformed into something resembling a town hall meeting. The crowd had swelled to nearly 50 people, many abandoning their own check-in processes to witness and support what was unfolding. The airport's normal efficiency had given way to something far more powerful, a spontaneous community united against injustice. Airport manager Thomas Green arrived, his face flushed from hurrying across the terminal after being alerted to the situation. Impeccably dressed in a tailored suit with the airline's colors subtly incorporated into his tie, Green practiced corporate calm despite the chaos around him. "Ms. Washington," he said, approaching Jasmine with an extended hand and a media-trained smile, "I'm Thomas Green, Newark Operations Manager. I want to personally apologize for any misunderstanding and invite you to my office where we can address your concerns properly." The strategic use of misunderstanding wasn't lost on Jasmine or the attentive crowd. It was classic corporate language designed to minimize the incident without acknowledging the underlying discrimination. "Mr. Green," Jasmine replied without accepting his handshake, "this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was discrimination, witnessed by dozens of people and documented on multiple videos." She gestured to the phone still recording around them. "Moving this conversation behind closed doors serves your interests, not justice." A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. Green's smile faltered slightly. "We take allegations of discrimination very seriously," he said, emphasizing allegations in a way that subtly questioned their validity. "Our private offices would simply provide a more appropriate venue for this sensitive discussion." "This happens in private every day," Jasmine responded, her voice carrying clearly through the terminal. "Private discussions lead to private apologies and private promises to do better, while the public systems of discrimination remain intact. Today, we're having a public conversation about a public problem." Several onlookers applauded. Jasmine noticed local news crews arriving, reporters setting up cameras at the periphery of the crowd. The story was growing beyond even social media now. Harold Bennett stepped forward again, surprising everyone by positioning himself directly beside Jasmine rather than maintaining a safe corporate distance. "Mr. Green," Bennett said, his CEO authority evident in his tone, "I witnessed the disparate treatment firsthand. Ms. Washington was questioned extensively while I was welcomed without verification. There's no ambiguity here." Green's professional mask slipped momentarily, revealing the panic beneath. Having one CEO allege discrimination was problematic, having another CEO, a white male one at that, confirm it was potentially catastrophic for the airline's reputation. As if sensing the shifting power dynamics, security began attempting to disperse the growing crowd. Officer Wilson and two newly arrived colleagues moved through the gathered onlookers, instructing them to keep moving and clear the area. These efforts only intensified public interest. Passengers who might have walked past now stopped specifically because security was trying to prevent them from doing so. The human tendency to investigate precisely what authorities don't want seen worked in Jasmine's favor. "The airline's CEO has been contacted," Green announced, checking his phone with visible anxiety. "Jackson Phillips is aware of the situation and is personally involved in the response." This revelation caused a stir. Phillips was known for rarely involving himself in operational matters, preferring to remain focused on business strategy and leaving customer service issues to his team. His direct involvement signaled the severity with which the airline was now treating the incident. "While we await guidance from leadership," Green continued, "I want to assure Ms. Washington that she will of course be accommodated on today's flight to San Francisco, with our compliments." "This isn't about a free ticket, Mr. Green," Jasmine replied, her voice firm but controlled. "This is about dignity. Every day, Black executives, doctors, lawyers, and other professionals are subjected to additional scrutiny, questioned about our presence in first-class spaces, and made to prove we belong in rooms our white counterparts enter without challenge." Her words resonated through the terminal. Several black travelers in the crowd nodded in solemn recognition of experiences they had endured silently countless times. "What happened today is not isolated," Jasmine continued, now addressing the gathered crowd as much as Green. It's systemic. And systems don't change through private apologies or free tickets. They change through transparency, accountability, and structural reform. A spontaneous round of applause erupted. Even some airline staff, watching from a distance, seemed moved by her words. Behind Green, Jasmine could see airline representatives huddled in urgent conversation, occasionally glancing nervously at the news cameras. Corporate communications teams were undoubtedly being mobilized, crisis management protocols activated. Nathan Jenkins, Jasmine's assistant, pushed through the crowd, having been alerted to the situation through social media. His expression showed concern mixed with fierce loyalty. "The Innovate Tech executives have been notified about the delay," he said quietly to Jasmine. "They've expressed full support and are flexible about rescheduling the meeting." Jasmine nodded gratefully. At least the merger negotiations wouldn't be jeopardized by her stand. In fact, based on Nathan's report, her potential business partners respected her actions. As the standoff continued, a new figure approached, a woman in her 50s wearing an airline uniform with multiple stripes indicating senior rank. "Ms. Washington, I'm Linda Davis, terminal supervisor," she introduced herself, her expression grave but open. "I need to inform you that what you experienced today is not isolated within our organization. We've received similar complaints previously, and an internal investigation was already underway before today's incident." This unexpected disclosure caused Green to pale visibly. Even Brenda, who had remained at her position behind the counter throughout the confrontation, looked up sharply. "Ms. Taylor has been the subject of 3 formal complaints in the past month alone," Davis continued, her professional demeanor not quite masking her disapproval. "All from black first-class passengers who reported treatment similar to what you experienced today." The revelation landed like a bombshell. This wasn't just about Jasmine's experience anymore, it was about a pattern of behavior that the airline had been aware of but had failed to address until it became a public relations crisis. As this new information rippled through the crowd, Jasmine caught Bennett's eye. His expression reflected a complex mix of emotions: shock at the systemic nature of the discrimination, embarrassment at his previous blindness to it, and something else, a dawning resolution. In that moment, Jasmine realized that what had begun as a personal stand against injustice was transforming into something much larger. The private indignities suffered daily by countless travelers were being dragged into the light, forcing a public reckoning that would be impossible to resolve with the usual corporate platitudes and private settlements. The chaos she had catalyzed was just beginning. As the confrontation entered its second hour, the first-class check-in area had been effectively transformed into an impromptu public forum. Airport operations flowed around the gathered crowd like a river diverted by a sudden boulder, with other passengers checking in at different counters while casting curious glances at the unfolding drama. Terminal supervisor Linda Davis had made a critical decision that changed the trajectory of the entire situation. Rather than continuing the corporate stonewalling, she chose transparency, a choice that clearly made manager Thomas Green uncomfortable as he repeatedly checked his phone for guidance from airline headquarters. "Ms. Washington," Davis said, her voice steady despite the career risk she was taking, "I believe you should see this." She produced a tablet and pulled up what appeared to be an internal database. Turning it so Jasmine could view the screen, she continued, "These are incident reports filed by our staff and complaints submitted by passengers over the past 6 months, categorized by nature of complaint and demographic information." Jasmine studied the screen, quickly grasping the significance of what she was seeing. The data showed a clear pattern: black first-class passengers were flagged for additional verification at a rate nearly 8 times higher than their white counterparts. The most frequent initiator of these verifications was Brenda Taylor, with Supervisor Keith Rodriguez approving virtually all of her actions without investigation. This data was compiled as part of an internal investigation that began last month, Davis explained. The findings were submitted to corporate leadership 3 weeks ago, but no action has been taken. Rachel Brown, the attorney who had allied herself with Jasmine, peered at the screen with professional interest. "This constitutes direct evidence of disparate treatment," she noted. The airline was aware of the pattern and failed to intervene despite clear statistical evidence. Green stepped forward, his corporate calm finally cracking. "Ms. Davis, that information is confidential company property. Sharing it with outside parties violates multiple policies and potentially your employment contract." Davis straightened her shoulders. "I'm aware of the potential consequences, Mr. Green. I'm also aware of my moral and legal obligations to prevent discrimination when I have knowledge of it." Her principled stand drew murmurs of approval from the onlookers. Someone in the back of the crowd started a slow clap that quickly spread. Meanwhile, Harold Bennett was engaged in an intense phone conversation several feet away. Jasmine caught fragments. "No, Jess, you were right. Yes, I'm standing right here witnessing it. No, I can't just walk away now." When he rejoined the group, Bennett's expression had changed. The corporate mask had slipped, revealing something more genuine beneath. "I just spoke with my daughter," he explained to Jasmine. "She reminded me that witnessing injustice and remaining silent makes me complicit. I've been silent, or worse, oblivious, for too long." Before Jasmine could respond, Nathan approached with his own tablet. "The videos have gone viral," he reported. "Over 2 million views across platforms in the last hour. Hashtag first-class equality is trending nationally. And this just arrived." He showed Jasmine an email from Lawrence Wilson, TechVision's chief legal counsel, who had been monitoring the situation remotely. "Have prepared preliminary documentation for discrimination suit. Evidence overwhelming with multiple witnesses and statistical data. Strategic recommendation, leverage current public attention to push for systemic changes rather than monetary settlement. Historical opportunity to create industry-wide precedent. Asterisk." Jasmine nodded, her resolve strengthening. This was no longer about making her flight or even receiving an apology. It was about using this moment to create lasting change. As if on cue, a distinguished older man in an impeccably tailored suit entered the scene, flanked by airline executives. Jackson Phillips, CEO of the airline, had arrived personally, an unprecedented response that signaled the gravity with which corporate headquarters now viewed the situation. "Ms. Washington," Phillips greeted her with a deferential nod. "I'm deeply troubled by what I've learned about your experience today and the pattern it appears to represent." His careful wording, "appears to represent," maintained plausible deniability while acknowledging the seriousness of the allegations. Classic CEO speak that Jasmine recognized from her own corporate training. "Mr. Phillips," she replied, matching his formal tone, "I appreciate your presence. It suggests you understand that what happened today reflects systemic issues requiring leadership attention rather than frontline damage control." Phillips glanced at the news cameras now recording from multiple angles, then at the data still displayed on Linda Davis's tablet, and finally at Harold Bennett standing supportively beside Jasmine. The situation had all the elements corporate leaders dread: clear evidence of wrongdoing, media attention, high-profile witnesses, and viral social media exposure. "I assure you, we take these matters extremely seriously," Phillips began, but was interrupted by a commotion near the entrance to the check-in area. A group of airline employees had arrived, many wearing similar platinum service pins to Brenda's. They approached Linda Davis, speaking in hushed but intense tones. After a brief conversation, Davis turned to address the group. "These are first-class service representatives from throughout the terminal," she explained. "They've come forward to confirm that what Ms. Washington experienced reflects unofficial but widely understood practices. Specifically, they were trained to apply additional security measures," she made air quotes with her fingers, "to passengers who might be in the wrong line." One of the employees, a young Hispanic woman, stepped forward nervously. "We were never explicitly told to profile black passengers," she clarified, but the examples used in training and the feedback received from supervisors made it clear that certain passengers were expected to verify their status while others were not. Another employee nodded. "If we didn't question someone who supervisors thought we should have, we'd be reprimanded for security lapses." But questioning someone like Mr. Bennett would get us in trouble for harassing valuable customers. These first-hand accounts from employees transformed the situation from an isolated incident into clear evidence of institutional discrimination. Phillips's expression darkened as he realized the legal and reputational exposure had just expanded exponentially. Meanwhile, Nathan showed Jasmine another update on his tablet. TechVision's executive team had unanimously voted to postpone all business with the airline pending resolution of the discrimination issues. Similar statements were being released by other companies, sparked by executives who had witnessed the confrontation personally or seen the viral videos. A corporate boycott was forming in real time, threatening millions in high-margin business class revenue. Phillips pulled Green and several executives into a hurried consultation. Their whispered conversation was tense, with Phillips repeatedly glancing at the growing media presence. When he returned to address Jasmine, Phillips's approach had changed noticeably. MS. Washington, it appears we have serious issues to address, he acknowledged, dropping the qualifying language. I'm prepared to take immediate action, but I'd like to understand what you believe appropriate resolution would look like. It was the question Jasmine had been waiting for, the moment when reactionary damage control could transform into proactive change. She had spent the last hour formulating not just demands but a vision for systemic reform. Mr. Phillips, she began, her voice clear and confident, this isn't about me receiving special treatment or compensation. It's about ensuring equal dignity for all passengers regardless of race, gender, or appearance. She outlined 3 specific demands: a comprehensive audit of the airline's check-in practices conducted by an independent civil rights organization, mandatory anti-bias training for all customer-facing staff, and the creation of a senior executive position focused exclusively on equity and inclusion, reporting directly to Phillips. As she spoke, Harold Bennett nodded in agreement, occasionally adding supporting points from his own business experience. Their impromptu alliance, competitors in the marketplace becoming allies in the fight for equality, added powerful symbolism to the moment. Phillips listened attentively, occasionally conferring with his team. When Jasmine finished, he didn't immediately agree to her terms but promised a comprehensive response within the hour. As the airline executives withdrew to deliberate, Jasmine checked her watch. Her meeting in San Francisco had been rescheduled for the following morning, accommodating the delay. Whatever the outcome of this confrontation, she would still need to make a flight today. But something more important than a business meeting was happening here. The whispered experiences of discrimination that occurred daily in premium spaces across the country were being dragged into the light, forcing a public reckoning that no corporate public relations strategy could contain. The chaos she had sparked was evolving into something structured and purposeful, a movement with the potential to create lasting change. And surprisingly, she found an unexpected ally in Harold Bennett, a competitor who had discovered his conscience in the crucible of this public confrontation. As they waited for Phillips's response, Bennett turned to Jasmine with newfound respect in his eyes. "Whatever happens next," he said quietly, "you've already changed things. Including me." The airport's executive conference room, normally reserved for high-level operational meetings, had been hastily converted into a crisis management center. Jackson Phillips sat at the head of the polished mahogany table, surrounded by airline executives, legal counsel, and public relations specialists frantically developing response strategies. Outside, the situation continued to escalate. #first-class equality had become the top trending topic nationally, with over 5 million social media engagements in the past 2 hours. News vans from all major networks had arrived, broadcasting live from the terminal. Corporate clients were calling in, threatening to cancel their business contracts unless the airline took decisive action. Inside the conference room, Phillips faced the most significant crisis of his career. "The legal exposure is substantial," warned Helen Rivera, the airline's chief legal officer. "We have documented patterns of discriminatory treatment, employee whistleblowers confirming unofficial profiling practices, and statistical evidence showing disparate treatment of black first-class passengers. A class action lawsuit would be devastating. The public relations damage is already catastrophic," added Michael Chen, head of corporate communications. We're seeing a 23% drop in booking inquiries in real time. Corporate accounts representing over $30 million in annual revenue have already suspended travel with us pending resolution. Phillips rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of decisions that would define both his legacy and the airline's future. He had built his career on cautious, measured responses to challenges, finding the minimal concession that would resolve issues without setting expensive precedents. But this situation demanded something different. What about Washington's demands? He asked. The independent audit, the training program, the new executive position. From a PR perspective, they're actually quite reasonable, Chen admitted. We could frame accepting them as proactive leadership rather than capitulation. The audit would cost several million and likely uncover additional issues requiring remediation, Rivera cautioned. But refusing it now would appear as though we have something to hide. Phillips nodded slowly, coming to a decision that went against his usual incremental approach. Prepare a comprehensive response accepting all three demands, with concrete timelines for implementation. And add a fourth, financial consequences for managers who fail to address discriminatory practices under their supervision. The executives exchanged surprised glances. Phillips had built his reputation on protecting management from accountability measures. Also, he continued, I want to deliver this response personally, not through a press release or spokesperson. This situation requires visible leadership. As the team scrambled to draft the response, Phillips stepped out to make a private call to the airline's board chair, briefing her on the unprecedented actions he was about to take and securing her support against any shareholder backlash. Meanwhile, in the terminal, Jasmine and her growing coalition of supporters maintained their presence at the first-class check-in area. What had begun as a confrontation had evolved into something resembling an organized protest, with supporters taking turns sharing their own experiences of discrimination in premium travel spaces. Harold Bennett had become an unexpected ally, using his privilege and corporate stature to validate Jasmine's claims and shield her from attempts to minimize the situation. His presence complicated the usual narrative about disgruntled or difficult passengers, forcing acknowledgement of the systemic issues at play. Ms. Washington, Bennett said, approaching her with his phone in hand, my team at Silverstream has been monitoring the situation. Our board has unanimously approved a statement of support for your position and announced that we're suspending all corporate travel with this airline until your demands are met. Jasmine raised an eyebrow, genuinely surprised by this development. That's a significant step for a company with no direct involvement in this incident. Bennett nodded, looking slightly embarrassed. My daughter Jessica helped draft the statement. She pointed out that corporations like ours benefit from taking principled stands while individuals like you bear the actual risk of challenging discrimination. The least we can do is use our economic leverage to support those on the front lines. Their conversation was interrupted by Nathan, who approached with news that TechVision's executive team had followed Silverstream's lead, announcing their own travel suspension. More significantly, TechVision's clients and partners were joining the boycott, creating a cascading effect throughout the tech industry. The merger partners are still fully supportive, Nathan assured Jasmine. In fact, they've indicated that your handling of this situation has increased their confidence in your leadership. They're willing to reschedule at your convenience and have joined the corporate travel suspension. Jasmine felt a complex mix of emotions. She had never intended to become the face of a movement or to trigger an industry-wide boycott. She had simply reached a breaking point with the everyday indignities that professional black women endured silently. Yet somehow, her personal stand had catalyzed something much larger. After nearly 3 hours of negotiations and preparations, Jackson Phillips returned to the terminal, flanked by his executive team. The crowd parted to create a path between him and Jasmine, camera crews positioning themselves to capture the confrontation. Ms. Washington, Phillips began, his voice carrying through the now hushed terminal, on behalf of the entire airline, I want to extend our sincerest apologies for your experience today. Jasmine noted his careful wording, your experience, rather than our actions, still subtly distancing the corporation from responsibility. More importantly, Phillips continued, I want to acknowledge that your experience reflects systemic issues within our organization that require immediate and comprehensive address. This admission, acknowledging systemic problems rather than isolating the incident, represented a significant shift from standard corporate crisis management, which typically focuses on containing liability by treating incidents as isolated aberrations. After careful consideration of your proposals, we are prepared to implement all 3 of your suggested measures, Phillips announced. We will commission an independent audit of our check-in practices, implement mandatory anti-bias training for all customer-facing staff, and create a new executive position focused on equity and inclusion, reporting directly to me. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Phillips was accepting the demands without negotiation or dilution, an unprecedented response that signaled the severity of the airline's vulnerability. Additionally, Phillips continued, we will implement a 4th measure, clear accountability metrics for managers regarding discriminatory incidents under their supervision, with concrete consequences for failure to address biased treatment of passengers. This self-imposed addition surprised everyone, including Jasmine. It targeted the middle management layer that often insulated executives from accountability while perpetuating discriminatory practices on the ground. We've prepared detailed implementation timelines for each measure, Phillips said, gesturing to an assistant who distributed printed documents to Jasmine, her attorney Rachel Brown, and the media representatives. These will be made public on our website today, with quarterly progress reports to ensure transparency. The comprehensive response surpassed what Jasmine had anticipated. Phillips was not merely offering a personal apology or compensation, the usual corporate approach to discrimination complaints, but committing to structural changes with accountability mechanisms. Additionally, Phillips added, both Ms. Taylor and Supervisor Rodriguez have been placed on administrative leave pending investigation, and I've accepted the resignation of Mr. Green effective immediately for his mishandling of this situation. This announcement drew audible gasps. Corporate responses to discrimination rarely included immediate personnel consequences, especially for management. Phillips then turned directly to Jasmine. Ms. Washington, we would be honored to have you board your flight to San Francisco today, with our sincere apologies for the delay and distress you've experienced. The offer represented the final element of crisis management, normalizing the situation by returning to business operations. Yet it placed Jasmine in a difficult position. Accepting might signal that the matter was resolved, while refusing might appear unreasonable now that her demands had been met. Before she could respond, Harold Bennett stepped forward. If I may, he said, addressing both Jasmine and Phillips, I believe this situation presents an opportunity not just for accountability but for transformation. The issues Ms. Washington has highlighted exist throughout our industry and society. Bennett turned to face Phillips directly. Rather than simply returning to business as usual, I propose something more meaningful, a joint commitment between Silverstream Tech and your airline to develop industry-wide standards for equitable treatment in premium travel spaces. The proposal was bold, expanding the resolution from a single corporation to an industry-wide initiative, with Bennett voluntarily involving his own company in addressing systemic discrimination. Phillips hesitated, clearly calculating the implications of such an expanded commitment. But with cameras rolling and public attention focused on his response, the pressure to demonstrate genuine commitment to change was overwhelming. That's an excellent proposal, Mr. Bennett, Phillips acknowledged. We would welcome such a partnership. He turned back to Jasmine. Ms. Washington, would TechVision be interested in joining this initiative as well? Your expertise in both technology and lived experience would be invaluable in developing effective solutions. The invitation skillfully repositioned Jasmine from adversary to potential partner, offering her a voice in shaping the changes she had demanded. It was a sophisticated corporate maneuver, but one that genuinely advanced the cause of equity. Jasmine considered the offer carefully. Accepting meant assuming responsibility for helping implement the changes she had demanded, a significant commitment of time and resources during a critical business period. Refusing might undermine the momentum toward substantive change. TechVision would be willing to contribute to such an initiative, she agreed finally. with the understanding that our participation isn't a substitute for your company's direct accountability for implementing the promised changes. The negotiation concluded with handshakes captured by dozens of cameras, images that would appear on news broadcasts nationwide that evening. What had begun as a personal stand against discrimination had evolved into a corporate commitment to structural change, with unprecedented transparency and accountability mechanisms. As preparations were made for Jasmine to board her delayed flight, she found herself in an unexpected position, no longer just a victim of discrimination seeking redress, but a catalyst for systemic change with corporate power players now committed to supporting her cause. The question remained whether these public commitments would translate into meaningful action once the cameras stopped rolling and public attention inevitably shifted elsewhere. But something fundamental had changed. The private indignities faced by black travelers in premium spaces had been dragged into the light, making it harder for corporations to return to business as usual. The first-class cabin of Flight 1857 to San Francisco bore little resemblance to the usual quiet, exclusive atmosphere of premium air travel. As Jasmine settled into her seat, the same one she had been denied hours earlier, she found herself at the center of a transformed environment. Fellow passengers approached to express support, share their own experiences, or simply acknowledge the significance of what they had witnessed in the terminal. Flight attendants provided service with a new awareness, their interactions reflecting the scrutiny now placed on how the airline treated its diverse clientele. Captain Sarah Rodriguez personally welcomed Jasmine aboard, an unprecedented gesture that underscored how deeply the confrontation had shaken the airline's operational culture. "What you did today matters," Rodriguez said quietly, leaning close to be heard over the cabin noise. "Not just for passengers but for crew members like me who've seen these patterns for years without the power to address them." As the plane reached cruising altitude, Jasmine finally had a moment to process the whirlwind events of the day. She opened her laptop, intending to review her merger presentation, but found herself instead reading through the hundreds of messages that had flooded her inbox. Corporate leaders, civil rights organizations, and ordinary travelers had reached out, some offering support, others sharing similar experiences, many asking how they could contribute to the movement she had inadvertently launched. The airline's stock had dropped 3% in afternoon trading as news of the confrontation spread. Financial analysts were issuing statements questioning whether the carrier's premium business model was sustainable given the revelations about discriminatory practices. The economic consequences were already exceeding anything Jasmine had anticipated. A gentle tap on her shoulder interrupted her thoughts. Harold Bennett stood in the aisle, holding a glass of sparkling water. "Mind if I join you for a moment?" he asked, gesturing to the empty seat beside her. Jasmine nodded, curious about what her unexpected ally wanted to discuss away from the cameras and crowd. "I owe you an apology," Bennett began after settling in. "Not just for benefiting from the preferential treatment today, but for my previous interactions with you." Jasmine raised an eyebrow, waiting for him to continue. "At the National Tech Summit last year, when Tech Vision won Innovation of the Year, I barely acknowledged your achievement," Bennett admitted. "I told myself it was just professional rivalry, but today forced me to recognize something uncomfortable. I've been dismissive of female executives, particularly women of color, throughout my career." The candid admission surprised Jasmine. Corporate leaders rarely acknowledged such biases, especially to those they had marginalized. "My daughter Jessica has been trying to educate me for years," Bennett continued. "She's a sociology professor specializing in workplace discrimination. I always considered her research interesting but somewhat theoretical, not particularly relevant to my world." He shook his head ruefully. "Today I witnessed exactly what she's been describing, the different standards applied to you versus me, despite our identical professional status. I can't unsee it now." "Awareness is the first step," Jasmine acknowledged. "But what matters is what happens next." Bennett nodded. "That's actually why I wanted to speak with you privately. The initiative I proposed with the airline, developing industry-wide standards for equitable treatment, I'm serious about it. And I'd like Silverstream and TechVision to collaborate on technology that could help implement those standards." The proposal was unexpected. Their companies were competitors, after all, often vying for the same clients and investment dollars. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Jasmine asked. "An equity-focused AI tool," Bennett explained, animation entering his voice as he described the technical concept. "Something that could analyze customer service patterns across industries to identify disparities in treatment based on race, gender, or other characteristics." The idea was intriguing, leveraging both companies' technical expertise to address the very discrimination Jasmine had faced. It would transform her personal experience into structural solutions that could benefit countless others. Such a project would require significant resources, Jasmine noted, her mind already calculating potential development costs and implementation challenges. "Silverstream is prepared to commit $50 million to initial development," Bennett replied without hesitation. "And I've already spoken with our board about ensuring diverse leadership for the project." The conversation continued throughout the flight, evolving from concept to concrete planning. By the time the plane began its descent into San Francisco, what had begun as a conflict between a black CEO and a discriminatory system had transformed into an unprecedented collaboration to address that system's underlying biases. Meanwhile, at the airline's headquarters, the emergency board meeting called to address the day's events was reaching its own transformative conclusions. The viral videos, corporate boycott, and potential legal liability had created the perfect storm necessary to overcome institutional inertia. "We need to get ahead of this," urged board member Diana Chen, whose background in crisis management made her voice particularly influential. Phillips' four-point response was necessary but not sufficient. "We need to position ourselves as leaders in addressing an industry-wide problem." The board ultimately approved a comprehensive 5-year plan that went beyond Phillips' initial commitments. The centerpiece was the creation of a new executive position, Chief Diversity Officer, with real authority and substantial resources. After considerable debate, they unanimously approved offering the position to Dr. William Turner, the neurosurgeon who had stepped forward during the terminal confrontation to share his own experiences of discrimination. The decision represented a significant departure from corporate norms, where such positions were often filled by internal candidates with limited authority and resources. By selecting an accomplished outside figure who had personally experienced the airline's discriminatory practices, the board signaled genuine commitment to transformation rather than mere damage control. In Newark, Linda Davis had been called into a meeting expecting termination for sharing confidential company data during the confrontation. Instead, she was informed that her actions, while technically violating policy, had ultimately served the company's best interests by forcing necessary changes. Not only would she retain her position, but she would serve as the implementation leader for the new anti-bias training program, reporting directly to the incoming Chief Diversity Officer. Brenda Taylor and Keith Rodriguez remained on administrative leave, their futures with the airline uncertain. Rather than simply terminating them, the usual corporate response when employees create public relations problems, Phillips had made the unexpected decision to offer them the option of participating in a restorative justice process. They would have the opportunity to acknowledge the harm caused by their actions, understand the systemic context that enabled their behavior, and potentially contribute to developing solutions. This approach represented another departure from standard corporate crisis management, which typically sacrifices individual employees to protect institutional reputation without addressing underlying cultures and systems. As these changes unfolded across multiple locations, social media continued to amplify the impact. #FirstClassEquality had evolved from a hashtag about one incident to a broader movement challenging discrimination in premium spaces across industries. From luxury retail to high-end restaurants, Black consumers began sharing their experiences of being questioned, scrutinized, or denied service despite their ability to pay. The movement was having particular resonance in Silicon Valley, where tech companies were scrambling to demonstrate their commitment to equity. By the time Jasmine's plane landed in San Francisco, multiple tech CEOs had issued statements examining their own company's practices and pledging reforms. During her car ride from the airport to her hotel, Jasmine received a call from her longtime mentor, Dr. Eleanor Shepard, the former dean of MIT School of Management and one of the few Black women to have served as a Fortune 500 CEO before her retirement. "I saw what happened," Eleanor said without preamble. "You've started something significant, Jasmine." "It wasn't intentional," Jasmine admitted. "I just reached my breaking point with the everyday indignities." "That's often how movements begin," Eleanor replied. Rosa Parks wasn't planning to spark a bus boycott when she refused to give up her seat. Sometimes the most powerful catalysts for change are simply people who decide they're no longer willing to accommodate injustice. The comparison felt overwhelming, but Eleanor continued before Jasmine could protest. "The question now is what you'll do with this platform. You've secured commitments from the airline and unexpected allies like Bennett, but institutional promises are easily broken once public attention fades. What would you suggest?" Jasmine asked, valuing her mentor's decades of experience navigating corporate America as a black woman. "Transform this from a moment into a movement," Eleanor advised. "The collaboration with Bennett is a good start, but think bigger. You have the attention of the business world right now, use it to create structural accountability that outlasts this news cycle." The conversation continued as Jasmine reached her hotel, providing guidance that would prove invaluable in the days ahead. Eleanor's final words particularly resonated. "Remember, true transformation isn't just changing policies or practices, it's changing power structures and who has a voice within them." As Jasmine prepared for her merger meeting the following morning, she found her presentation taking on new dimensions. The TechVision Innovate Tech merger had always been about combining complementary technologies and market positions. Now, it also represented an opportunity to embed equity principles into a billion-dollar corporate entity from its formation. She reworked key slides, adding elements about diverse leadership, inclusive product development, and ethical AI principles. These weren't superficial additions meant to capitalize on recent attention, but structural commitments that would shape the merged company's DNA. The merger that had been her focus when boarding the flight that morning now seemed like just one component of a much larger transformation, one that extended beyond corporate boardrooms to address fundamental questions about who belongs in spaces of privilege and power, and who gets questioned when they claim their rightful place. 1 month after the Newark Airport confrontation, Jasmine Washington stood at the podium of the National Business Leadership Conference in Chicago, surveying an audience that represented the most influential figures in American commerce. CEOs, investors, policymakers, and media filled the grand ballroom of the Lakeside Convention Center, their attention focused intently on the woman whose standoff at an airport check-in counter had catalyzed a national conversation about race, privilege, and corporate accountability. "When I was denied boarding that day," Jasmine began, her voice steady and clear, "I wasn't thinking about launching a movement or transforming an industry. I was simply exhausted by the cumulative weight of 1,000 similar moments when my presence in spaces of privilege was questioned despite having earned my place there." The room was silent, executives who normally checked phones during speeches sitting fully attentive. "What happened next surprised everyone, including me," she continued. "A spontaneous coalition formed, fellow travelers, airline employees with moral courage, and even competitors who recognized that some principles transcend market rivalry. Together, we transformed a moment of injustice into a movement for structural change." She paused, allowing her gaze to move deliberately across the room. "The question before us today is whether that movement will result in temporary adjustments or fundamental transformation. Will we return to business as usual once public attention shifts elsewhere, or will we create new standards that permanently expand who belongs in spaces of privilege and power?" The speech continued for 30 minutes, methodically outlining the concrete changes implemented over the past month while challenging the assembled leaders to view these not as exceptional responses to a crisis but as new baseline expectations for corporate behavior. Jasmine detailed the comprehensive anti-bias measures being implemented industry-wide, including the airline's new transparency reporting system that publicly disclosed demographic data on passenger complaints, service recovery efforts, and employee disciplinary actions. She described the unexpected outcomes of the restorative justice process involving Brenda Taylor, who had initially been placed on administrative leave. Rather than simply being terminated as a scapegoat for systemic problems, Brenda had been given the opportunity to understand the harm caused by her actions and contribute to developing solutions. "Ms. Taylor is here today," Jasmine said, gesturing to a woman seated near the back of the room. Her journey from enforcing discriminatory practices to helping dismantle them offers an important lesson. True transformation requires changing systems, not just replacing the individuals within them. Brenda stood briefly, her expression a complex mix of emotions. Her participation in the conference represented another departure from standard corporate crisis management, which typically prioritized distance from problematic employees rather than engagement and accountability. The most significant announcement came near the end of Jasmine's address. After outlining the progress made within the airline industry, she revealed the broader initiative that had emerged from her unexpected collaboration with Harold Bennett. Today, I'm proud to announce the formal launch of the Equity Technology Initiative, a joint venture between TechVision Enterprises and Silverstream Tech, Jasmine declared. This independent entity will develop AI-powered tools to identify patterns of discriminatory treatment across industries and create accountability mechanisms that don't rely solely on individual consumers having the courage and resources to challenge injustice. Harold Bennett joined her on stage for this portion of the announcement, symbolizing the unusual alliance that had formed between former competitors. Their companies had completed a $50 million initial investment in the initiative, with another $100 million committed over the next 5 years. My journey in this process has been one of recognition and responsibility, Bennett acknowledged, taking the microphone briefly. Recognition of how systems of privilege have benefited me while imposing barriers on others, and responsibility to use my position to help dismantle those barriers. The joint venture announcement generated a ripple of murmurs throughout the audience. Corporate collaborations on social issues weren't unprecedented, but the scale, specific focus on racial equity, and partnership between competing firms represented something new in American business. As Bennett returned to his seat, Jasmine concluded her address with a challenge that tied personal experience to structural change. Excellence isn't just what you achieve, she said, but how you transform the path for others. Each of us in this room has overcome obstacles to reach positions of influence. The question is whether we'll use that influence merely to succeed within existing systems or to create more equitable systems for those who follow. The standing ovation that followed wasn't just a polite gesture but a genuine response to a message that had touched something fundamental in the business community's understanding of its social responsibilities. After the formal program concluded, the convention center hummed with energy as executives engaged in animated discussions about implementing similar accountability measures within their own industries. What had begun as a crisis response by one airline was evolving into a broader reconsideration of how corporations identified and addressed discriminatory patterns. Among those seeking out Jasmine after her speech was Dr. William Turner, the neurosurgeon who had stepped forward during the airport confrontation. Now serving as the airline's first chief diversity officer, Turner carried himself with the same confidence he had displayed in the terminal, but now backed by institutional authority and substantial resources. We've implemented comprehensive anti-bias training for all customer-facing staff, he reported, but more importantly, we've restructured performance evaluations and compensation systems to reward inclusive practices rather than just processing efficiency. This structural approach, changing the incentives that shaped employee behavior rather than simply mandating sensitivity training, represented the kind of fundamental transformation Jasmine had advocated. Nathan Jenkins approached with news about the merger that had been Jasmine's original purpose in flying to San Francisco. The deal had been successfully completed the previous week, with terms even more favorable than initially projected. The confrontation at Newark, rather than derailing the negotiations, had ultimately strengthened TechVision's position by demonstrating Jasmine's leadership capacity under pressure. Innovate Tech's CEO specifically mentioned your handling of the airport situation as increasing their confidence in the merger, Nathan noted. They were impressed by your ability to balance principled stands with practical solutions. Throughout the evening, Jasmine was approached by numerous executives who had witnessed the original confrontation either in person or through viral videos. Many shared how the incident had prompted them to examine practices within their own organizations, often uncovering similar patterns of differential treatment. A retail CEO described discovering that security staff followed black customers at 9 times the rate of white shoppers in their luxury stores. A hotel executive admitted finding that guests with ethnic-sounding names were significantly less likely to receive room upgrades despite identical loyalty program status. Each revelation confirmed what Jasmine had argued: her experience reflected systemic patterns rather than isolated incidents. As the conference wound down, Jasmine found herself in conversation with Jackson Phillips, the airline's CEO whose decision to meet her demands had set the transformation in motion. "I'll be honest," Phillips admitted, "when I first heard about the confrontation, my instinct was to minimize damage rather than address root causes. Your refusal to accept token gestures forced us to confront uncomfortable truths about our organization. And has that confrontation benefited your company?" Jasmine asked, genuinely curious about whether principles and profits had aligned. Phillips nodded thoughtfully. "Initially, we took a financial hit. The stock dropped, bookings decreased, corporate accounts suspended. But addressing these issues fundamentally has actually strengthened our business. Employee engagement has improved significantly. Customer satisfaction scores are up across all demographic groups. And the corporate accounts have not only returned but expanded their business with us." His experience echoed research Jasmine had long cited: diverse, equitable organizations ultimately outperformed those that merely maintained the status quo, even if making changes initially created disruption and discomfort. The following morning, before departing Chicago, Jasmine had one final meeting that symbolized how far the movement had come in just 1 month. She met with Zoe Parker, a young black woman recently promoted to TechVision's executive training program. The company's pipeline for future leadership. Over breakfast, Jasmine shared lessons from her own journey and the recent confrontation, while Zoe asked thoughtful questions about navigating spaces where her presence might still be questioned despite her qualifications. "There will always be Brendas and Keiths," Jasmine acknowledged, referring to the check-in agent and supervisor from Newark. "But increasingly, there will also be allies willing to stand beside you, systems designed to hold discriminatory behavior accountable, and platforms where your voice can catalyze change." As they concluded their meeting, Jasmine offered the guidance that had become her new mantra since the airport confrontation: excellence isn't just what you achieve, but how you transform the path for others. The words resonated with Zoe, who would carry them forward into her own leadership journey, continuing the transformation that had begun with one executive's refusal to accept discrimination as the price of success. As Jasmine boarded her flight home that afternoon, she experienced a full-circle moment. The first-class check-in process proceeded smoothly, without the additional scrutiny or verification that had once been routine. The agent greeting her displayed the small equity pin now worn by all the airline staff, a visual reminder of organizational values and accountability. It was a small change, but it represented something profound: the beginning of a world where excellence alone was sufficient to belong in spaces of privilege, where credentials weren't undermined by biased perceptions, and where systems were designed to ensure equal dignity for all who had earned their place. The transformation wasn't complete. Meaningful change never happened in a single moment or through one confrontation. But standing at Newark Airport 1 month after chaos had exploded at that same check-in counter, Jasmine Washington knew that the path forward had been irrevocably altered, not just for herself but for countless others who would no longer need to fight the same battles she had faced. This story powerfully illustrates that meaningful change often begins with a single person refusing to accept injustice. Jasmine's stand wasn't just about her own dignity, it became a catalyst for systemic transformation. The lesson here is threefold. First, discrimination thrives in silence. Speaking up creates the visibility needed for change. Second, allies matter. Bennett's support demonstrated how privilege can be leveraged for positive impact. Third, lasting change requires addressing systems, not just individuals. By focusing on structural reforms rather than just personal remedies, Jasmine ensured the impact extended far beyond her own experience. She understood that true leadership means creating paths for others, not just achieving personal success. Most importantly, she recognized that accountability must be built into systems rather than relying on individual courage, creating mechanisms that would continue working long after public attention faded. Have you ever witnessed discrimination and wished you had spoken up? Comment, courage, if you believe one person can spark meaningful change, or, together, if you think collective action is more effective. Have you experienced similar treatment in spaces where you rightfully belonged? Share your story below. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel for more powerful racism stories, and share with someone who needs to hear this message today. Thank you for joining this important conversation about confronting racism and building more equitable systems. Remember, your voice matters, and sometimes all it takes is one person standing firm to change everything.